and determination. Like President Reagan, President Trump is willing to talk to rivals, from Mikhail Gorbachov to Deng Xiaoping in the 1980s to Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping today. This is born of strength, not weakness. It is born of clarity of purpose. Folks in Washington like to criticize President Trump for doing so, but those critics forget that this is exactly what Ronald Reagan did. And America was better off for it. Like President Reagan, President Trump also knows how important it is to negotiate from a position of strength, especially military strength. And at the newly renamed Department of War, thanks to President Trump's leadership and to Congress, we received a historic boost in funding last year and believe that is only just the beginning. Make no mistake about it, President Trump is hell-bent on maintaining and accelerating the most powerful military the world has ever seen. The most powerful, the most lethal, and American-made. The arsenal of freedom. We're also restoring the warrior ethos back to basics: readiness, accountability, standards, discipline, lethality. I'm not sure if you saw, but I recently gave a speech on that topic to a few generals in Quantico. The War Department is the sword and the shield of peace through strength. We are the Strength Department, and we stand ready to wield that sword as President Trump directs. The opposite of peace through strength is war through weakness. Wokeness, weakness, and war. All specialties of Joe Biden and Lloyd Austin. The debacle in Afghanistan, a stain on our country and a sin committed against the troops. The weakness that unleashed Islamist war against Israel on October 7th. And that same weakness invited war in Ukraine. And Vladimir Putin saw the open door and he took it. Spy balloons flying over our country and SecDefs going AWOL for a week. Wokeness, weakness, war. You know, I was recently tempted when the discussion went out about hitting drug boats to use the phrase righteous strike. But then my team counseled me against it and said, sir, that's the phrase that was used by Mark Milley when a family of Afghans was struck as a response to what happened at Abbey Gate. They called it for 2 straight days a righteous strike, when they would have known within hours exactly what they struck. Weakness, wokeness, war. It's a new day. With Operation Midnight Hammer, the world saw, after decades of hemming and hawing, the decisive effect of American military strength in obliterating the Iranian nuclear program. President Trump said they can't have a nuclear bomb, and he meant it. Others have said it. President Trump did it. This operation was a textbook example of the Weinberger Doctrine in action. Decisive, focused, applied in a focused, clear-eyed way that advanced our nation's interests while avoiding another protracted war. Same goes for our limited but lethal actions against the Houthis in Yemen. Joe Biden tolerated the targeting of U.S. shipping. President Trump restored freedom of navigation. Another foundational and core national interest. Somewhere, Thomas Jefferson is smiling. And right now, the world is seeing the strength of American resolve in stemming the flow of lethal drugs to our country. Here, again, we've been focused, and here we've been clear. If you're working for a designated terrorist organization and you bring drugs to this country in a boat, we will find you and we will sink you. Let there be no doubt about it. President Trump can and will take decisive military action as he sees fit to defend our nation's interests. Let no country on earth doubt that for a moment. Like President Reagan, President Trump knows how to do so in a way that is tied to a clear purpose with a decisive and credible theory of military victory. Just as the lessons of Vietnam informed Ronald Reagan and his Weinberger Doctrine, so too the lessons of Iraq and Afghanistan guide President Trump and his secretary today. For years, a bipartisan consensus of neoconservatives and liberal internationalists led us from one disaster to another. They sent our nation's sons and daughters to war after rudderless war, even as they allowed our allies to grow weaker and our potential rivals stronger. From the very beginning, nearly a decade ago, President Trump called this out for what it is: stupid. An America last foreign policy. And they fought him for it. They tried to jail him for it, and they failed. Well, their time is over. Their America last bipartisan consensus is done. It is finished. Under President Trump's leadership, after decades of disastrous decisions by this nation's self-appointed so-called foreign policy elite, we're once again putting American interests first. We're prioritizing our nation's security, freedom, and prosperity, our citizens. As laid out by President Trump, we're doing it in a way that leaves not only our nation better off, but also the world. Out with utopian realism out with utopian idealism, in with hard-nosed realism. The president's approach is one of that flexible but practical realism, common sense, if you will, that looks at the world with a clear-eyed perspective, essential for serving America's real interests. The approach is informed by strategic rationality and cost-benefit assessments. We will define our vital interests in ways that are reasonable and that make sense to ordinary Americans. This is the approach and mindset that shapes the department's focus. As a result, the War Department will not be distracted by democracy-building, interventionism, undefined wars, regime change, climate change, woke moralizing, and feckless nation-building. We will instead put our nation's practical, concrete interests first. We will deter war. We will advance our interests. We will defend our people. Peace is our goal. And in service of that objective, we will always be ready to fight and win decisively if called upon. As part of this mission, we are asking American taxpayers to fund the world's greatest military. We're asking mothers and fathers across America to trust us with their most precious resource, their sons and daughters. And we will honor their trust and their sacrifice. The historic recruiting and retention numbers of President Trump's first year show who the American people trust. This means we will not send America's best to advance foolhardy or reckless adventures halfway around the world. It also means not asking them to pick up the tab for allies who should fund their own defense. Instead, and above all, it means that we only ask our warriors to fight for things that make America and Americans safe, free, and prosperous. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Nothing more and nothing less. Again, this is common sense, and that's what President Trump's War Department is all about. This common sense approach means prioritizing 4 key lines of effort at the Department of War. First, defending the U.S. homeland and our hemisphere. Second, deterring China through strength, not confrontation. Third, increased burden sharing for U.S. allies and partners. And fourth, supercharging the U.S. defense industrial base. As we apply President Trump's approach to flexible realism, the first 2 lines of effort are the primary operational focus of the Joint Force, for the simple reason that these missions matter the most for safety, freedom, and prosperity of Americans. At the same time, however, other threats persist around the world, including in Europe and the Middle East. We cannot ignore them, nor should we. That's why our approach also prioritizes burden sharing and burden shifting. Indeed, for the first time since Reagan's era, allied and partner burden sharing is no longer an afterthought or a nice to have. Today is a core element of our national defense. And finally, the 4th line of effort, maybe the most important, supercharging America's defense industrial base underwrites everything else. Last month, I gave another speech in Washington, this time to defense industry leaders, to announce a department-wide, not reform, a transformation of requirements, acquisitions, and foreign military sales. Our objective is simple if monumental. Transform the entire acquisition system to rapidly accelerate the fielding of capabilities and focus